The HUD OIG says 31 outstanding recommendations warrant priority status in 2025 because they would have the most significant impact on HUD programs. To explain how and what happens next, the Acting Inspector General for HUD, Stephen Begg, joins me now. Mr. Begg, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with what qualifies a recommendation to get onto your priority list.
To us, priority open recommendations are the ones that we've identified as having the biggest potential benefit to HUD programs. That could be in saving taxpayer dollars. It could be preventing widespread fraud or abuse, having a systemic benefit that makes HUD programs more efficient, more effective, or having a large-scale protection of taxpayer funds.
And you collected this list out of all of the recommendations that you've generated through your various investigations.
That's correct. We have, HUD has historically had a large number of open OIG recommendations. In 2019, there were over 2,100. And so we generated this report as a tool to kind of focus the recommendations for HUD leadership and try to create a space where we can generate actions on the ones that we feel will have the largest impact on programs.
And some agencies did manage to get off the list or to close out some of those high priority recommendations from last year. How hard is it, or what does it take to close out one of these complicated recommendations?
That can vary. In some instances, there are more straightforward fixes to controls like implementing a process to prevent someone from receiving a payment. It can be straightforward. In other instances, it can take long-term planning, IT modernization, coordination across multiple HUD program offices. So in some instances, they take years. In other instances, it can be quick fixes. It can be issuing new guidance, clarifying important program requirements. So it really varies. But we did close a number of these this year with HUD, and several program offices really made a push to act and improve in key areas.
So regardless of time, it sounds like it takes focused leadership attention.
Absolutely. I mean, in fairness to the HUD program officials, these are actions that they're taking to address issues on top of their day-to-day work. And it relates to their day-to-day work, but this is additional and extra work that goes in. And so making these priorities is difficult and challenging.
So you've got 31 total recommendations on your 2025 list. Some of them are carry-ins and some of them are new. Are there commonalities across these 31?
There are. Some of the commonalities are in cross-component or cross-program office issues. An example of that is managing fraud, risk, and improper payments. That takes coordination across HUD's leadership. It takes coordination both in financial management and in IT, and it really requires a lot of planning and then strategic execution. What we've asked HUD to do is assess fraud risk in each of its programs and start the process of thinking about, once we identify how our programs can be defrauded, what actions will we take to mitigate those risks, and which risks don't require action because they're acceptable risks as they are. That really requires HUD's chief financial officer and chief information officer to be part of a conversation with each program office leader in figuring out what are the biggest risks, what are we going to do to address them, and what does it take in terms of new developments, new processes, new procedures, training.
So not something necessarily that any one agency can solve by itself, but a real integration across the HUD headquarters staff and across agency silos.
That's correct.
And so how at HUD do you manage that? Is there a committee that's responsible for this, or does each agency chief take the lead?
It's both. So HUD's chief financial officer manages audit recommendation or OIG recommendation, follow-up and closure centrally, and coordinates across program officials. And we coordinate with that group, and we also follow up individually with program offices to communicate about what actions they're taking. The key to that process is really communication and regular feedback, because as recommendations age, things change. Some recommendations might become overcome by events, and then in other instances, there might be programmatic changes that require adjustments to the actions that we recommended. And so it's really a feedback loop between us and the program offices, and then really close coordination with HUD's chief financial officer.
I'm speaking with Stephen Begg. He's the acting IG for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Well, let's go back to some of those categories on your high-risk list. You mentioned the improper payments and managing fraud risk, but there's also some around promoting health and safety and HUD-assisted housing. Tell us about some of those.
Sure. Some of the areas where we've identified the need for urgent action really relate to tracking complaints about health and safety deficiencies, both in multifamily properties and in the area of lead hazards. So really understanding where the risks are and then tracking and having good processes and procedures for making sure that action's taken timely to address those issues. Each property is inspected periodically, making sure that HUD has a sound process for ensuring the inspections happen timely, but also that property owners can provide evidence that they've addressed emergency health and safety issues that really have a potential to do harm to the individuals living in those properties.
So here again, it's not something that the agency can do by itself, but they really have to engage their customer environment as well.
Absolutely. All of HUD's rental assistance, all of HUD's programs rely on strong partnerships with participants and private sector companies. And so the communication and the coordination is key. Having the information technology to track that efficiently and document things appropriately is also a challenge in this space.
So how do they engage, in this case, the property owners to help solve the problem that you've identified as a high priority?
Well, it's multi-layered. So HUD headquarters has a tracking mechanism for handling these, and then they rely on HUD field office staff to coordinate locally with the partners. And so there are multiple steps in that process, and having a strong process and procedure coupled with strong information technology to make sure the information is flowing and documented, and then having the coordination between the entities and HUD is the last step.
Well, and IT modernization and cybersecurity is one of your other categories. So as you're dealing with the clients or the constituencies and trying to modernize IT, you've got IT modernization as a critical priority.
Absolutely. It really is an underpinning of all of the challenges here. Without the systems in place, it becomes a people step, a people capacity issue. And so enhancing the systems, modernizing them, and making sure that they can capture all of the relevant data points, it would really benefit each of the challenges that we've identified in this report.
And IT kind of has two faces to it. One, internal to, in this case, HUD's operations, but a customer-facing side as well. Is that part of the considerations as you're thinking about the IT space?
Absolutely. If the systems don't work for the participants, then they're not going to be effective. And so that's a big piece of it. And also you mentioned cybersecurity. Protecting the information that comes in and out of HUD's network is key.
You have a lot of PII, I suppose, that comes in from your grantees, your partners, and actually the people who are occupying the housing space.
That's right. We identified in the report there are over 16 billion records containing PII in HUD systems.
Well, that's a big protection issue then.
Absolutely.
So as you are sitting in the IG space, are you responsible for providing oversight to the collection and collaboration around solving these high priority issues?
Certainly. It's a big part of the work that we do. Identifying issues and reporting them is the first step, but really seeing the action through recommendation closure is the key to making improvements in HUD programs. And so it's a big accountability measure for us. It's a